I'd like to welcome everybody to this evening's program, Returning with Love and Respect. This program has been sponsored as a schus, refuah shlema, for Rafal Naftali Moshe ben Rachel. Rav Yaakov Weinberg Zichrono Livracha used to share with us that the most vital component of serving Hashem is to have awareness, to be aware of what we're doing. The purpose of tonight's program is to help us, each one of us, to increase that awareness. I want to thank all of the Rabbanim who will be speaking this evening, and I especially want to thank Reb Ezra Stettin for his extra hard work in making this program happen. I'd like to introduce the first speaker this evening, Rabbi Minster.
We would think that as a community, being separated from our shuls, from our Bate Knesios and Bate Midrashos for so long, and now waiting so long to be able to return, that we would not need inspiration or direction in how to return. Even those that were privileged to daven in backyard minyanim, it only whetted our appetite to return to our real shuls. But the truth is, it is incredibly important to clarify for ourselves why we so strongly want to return, and in what way will we return. The Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Lamed Beis, brings a brisa from Yishmael ben Elazar that there are two averos which Amei Haaretz, people that are ignorant of Torah, die from. Number one is Shekarin L'Aron HaKodesh Arna. They call the Aron Kodesh simply an Aron, simply a box. Val Shekarin L'Beis HaKnesses, Beis Am. And they call the Beis Knesses a Beis Am. A Beis HaKnesses is a place where people gather. A Beis Am is really the same thing. Rashi says, Beis Am, Shemiskabsim B'Hakol, is a place where everyone gathers. Rashi adds that it's a Lashon Bazoy, it's a shameful, disgraceful language. But if it means a place that everyone gathers, how is it different than a Beis HaKnesses? And what is this sin that the Amei Haaretz are accused of in calling a basic nesses a base am. The Mefarshim explained that Rashi means when he says that everyone gathers there and shameful and disgraceful, is that somehow it excludes Hashem's presence from bringing the shul. But how? How is the word Beis Am really different than a Beis HaKnesses? And why is this connected particularly to Am Haaretz? The Maral explains that a Beis HaKnesses is more than a place to gather. A Beis HaKnesses is a place to connect. And our ability to connect, to have a Knessia, to have a Beis HaKnesses, is because of our neshama. It's that part of us that is connected at a higher level. It connects us to each other at that higher level. A Knessia is not just people standing together forming a group. That is just the Beis Am, a place where people gather. But to come together and to form something whole, that requires connection. And that connection comes from our neshama, from our higher being. The Am Haaretz, because his exposure to Torah is limited, does not see things so deeply. He does not see the higher element of a person. He sees the body, but he does not see the neshama. He does not see that higher part of us that is inside of us. And for him, he misses the ability to connect. For him, people just gather. And therefore, it is not a Beis HaKnesses. It's just a Beis Am. It's just a place to gather, not a place to connect. The Maral goes on to explain that just as a person has that higher dimension inside of them, that neshama, the shul also has two parts to it. The shul has a body, and that's its building. But there's something higher inside of the shul, and that is the presence of the Shekhinah. The Am Haaretz does not see this. To him, a person is a body, and a shul is a building. People can gather there, but they don't connect. They don't connect to each other, and they don't connect to the Shekhinah. It is just the Beis Am. It is not a Beis HaKnesses. But the lesson here for us is not just what name we use when we talk about the Beis HaKnesses. It's not just the name we use, because our actions also create a name. At the very end of Megillas Rus, when Rus has a child, the pasuk says, "Vatikrenu lo hashcheno shem." The neighbors called him a name. Lamar saying, "Yulad ben Naomi." A child was born to Naomi. Vatikrenu shmo Oved, and they called his name Oved. Who of Yishai, he's the father of Yishai, of David, the father of David. What does it mean that the neighbors gave him a name and they called him Oved? What about his parents? Even if Boaz was not there, but what about Rus? What about Naomi? What does it mean that the neighbors gave him a name? And the explanation is that the actions of the parents, the action of the family, of Boaz, of Rus, of Naomi, were so obviously the Shem Shemayim. It caused other people to see the appropriateness of that name. Of course, Oved, one who serves Hashem, is a name that parents gave. But the neighbors also called him by that name. They saw that it was such an appropriate name. The Medrash says that many people like to use that name Oved to serve, but not many people earn it. So a name is not just something that we use to describe something, but it's a name, it's something that our actions indicate how we refer to something, how we think about something. And we have to ask ourselves, are we acting like it is a Beis HaKnesses, a place of higher connection, of a higher connection to each other and a higher connection to Hashem? Or do our actions indicate that it is just a Beis Am, a place that we gather? I'm sure over the past weeks, each of us davening in really a laboratory, a controlled environment for davening, have certain feelings about how davening could be. Being able to make our own time for davening, our own pace, hopefully showed us the beauty of davening from beginning to end, of all the parts of davening coming together to help us with that connection to Hashem. And unfortunately, if we come late to davening, we miss sections of davening. And our distancing from each other at our backyard minyanim certainly has kept talking during davening down and distractions down. I thought to myself many times, davening behind that mask, that we need to be so careful about what comes out of our mouths when we're davening. We need to be careful about what comes into our mouths, what we breathe in. Breath is so connected to our neshama. And we need to be careful about what we let in to our neshamas and what we let into our minds when we're trying to daven. And so many different things that we may have noticed that we want to take with us into the shul, that we want to make sure that our davening is at that higher level. But how do we hold on to that? I want to suggest the following. The Maral talked about the Beis HaKnesses being a place where we connect to each other as well as connected to Hashem. When we go into that shul, we'll have the opportunity to look at each other, but we'll be distanced. What will we see? Many have said that 6 feet of distance is really Dalet Amos. The Gemara says something very interesting about Dalet Amos and davening. The Mishnah in Brachos asks, when is the right time to say the Shema in the morning? The Shema that is part of the morning davening. The Gemara brings the opinion of the Achirim. Achirim say the time to say Shema is Mishiyir es Chaveo Rachog Arba Amos. When a person sees his friend at a distance of 4 Amos, V'yakireno, and he recognizes him. What do we recognize when we look at each other from that distance? The Gemara Brachos also says, when people gather, their das is not the same. Their das, their thinking, the part that's so close to our neshama, their das is different. And their faces are different as well. Chazal say in another place, just like each of our faces are different, so too our das is different as well. Our faces reflect our inner being. Our faces reflect our neshama. So what do we see when we look at each other? Do we just see a face? Or do we see the daya? Do we see that part that is connected to the neshama? At the moment, faces are very hard to see. We're all behind a mask. But let us use that opportunity to focus on the neshama, the higher dimension of each of us, that part that really connects us. That should be our focus when we're in our shuls. The higher dimension of the shul. Hashem's presence that is in the shul. Let's not act in a way that will cause others to say the name that we have for that place is a Beis Am, which is buzzy, which is shameful or disgraceful. Let's think of the place as a Beis HaKnesses, a place where we connect at that higher level to each other and to Hashem. And let's be that kind of person that people look at and say, that is an Oved. That is someone who truly serves Hashem.
I want to thank the Cincinnati Community Kollel for putting together this very meaningful event, and especially Rabbi Ezra Stettin for all of his input and hard work. A thought that keeps on coming back to me as we progress step by step into the reopening of our state, the reopening of our community, is a comment that I heard from Rabbi Ilan Feldman of Bet Jacob, Atlanta. He was describing a thought that's been haunting him. And he said that something that has been haunting him over the course of this coronavirus pandemic is the thought that we've gone through so much. We've experienced so much upheaval, so much disruption to our lives. And by having our lives being thrown off course, so to speak, with routines being broken, there's so many lessons that we've learned. The greatest tragedy would be to emerge from this experience empty-handed, to walk away from it the same way that we were before it all began. That would be a terrible loss. And that was the thought that was haunting him. And now as we're preparing to re-enter our shuls, our bate kinesios, our bate midrashos, we're preparing to reoccupy our holy spaces. We are being presented with a golden opportunity. If you think about it, we're being given a chance to restart, we are being given a fresh start. And it's critically important for us at this moment to think about what we want our experience in our shuls, in our holy spaces, what we want it to look like, and to prepare for that now, so that we can, when we tell our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren about the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, we can share with them not just the events, but what we learned and how we grew, how we became greater people as a result of it. So how do we take this inspiration, take all these lessons that we've learned, and translate it into growth, translate it into real, meaningful, long-lasting change? Looking back to last week's parsha, Parshas Naso. In Parshas Naso, we have the parsha of the Sota, the wayward wife, and immediately following that is the parsha of the Nazir, the Nazarite. And Chazal, our sages, they teach what was the purpose for the Torah, putting these two parshas one after the other. And Chazal make the statement, Kollel ro'eh sota bekukula, yazer atzmo min hayayin. Anyone who sees the Sota, the wayward wife, in her disgrace, should cut himself off from drinking wine, should make himself into a Nazir. As with all the statements of Chazal, there are so many individual lessons that we can learn from the nuances of this statement. But what stands out for me, what I think is particularly relevant for us right now, this moment, is the fact that the inspiration was not enough. The exposure, being stirred by seeing, by being exposed to the Sota B'Kilkula, this woman in her disgrace, and seeing the results of adultery and what it can lead to, that is not enough. Positive action is required. Yazer atzmo min hayayin, to make himself a Nazir. And as we prepare to re-enter our holy spaces, and we're full of emotion and inspiration, we want to take this time, right now, tonight, to think about actions, positive actions that we can put in place to translate that inspiration into long-lasting, meaningful change. And there's another thing that I think is important for us to think about when we wrap our heads around how we're going to make the most of this opportunity, how we're going to seize the opportunity we're being presented with. There's an article that was published in a Mishpacha magazine in the beginning of April, just before Pesach, written by Rabbi Aaron Lapiansky. Rabbi Lapiansky talks about exactly this point, about how there's so many things that we've learned in this experience. Having a new appreciation for the value, the privilege that it is to be able to daven to Hashem in a shul, to have a space dedicated to tefillah, the unique, special quality that affords us. Having a greater appreciation for our schools, now that we're being challenged with educating our children ourselves. So many different things that we have been learning through this experience. But he writes, will anything change as a result of it? Not necessarily. And not because we're not inspired, and not because we're not sincere, but because we're human beings. And part of the reality of a human being is that change doesn't happen immediately. Change happens gradually over a course of time. And if we think of the timing of the coronavirus, I think that there's a lesson there as well. The outbreak began shortly after Purim. The height of the lockdown was in Pesach time. And it continued through Sfiras HaOmer, The reopening began at the time of Shavuos of Kabbalah Satorah. If we think of Pesach, Passover, that was the time of the greatest inspiration in the history of our nation. Open miracles, one after the other, the 10 plagues, splitting of the sea. And yet, that alone was not enough for us to be ready to receive the Torah. We were not ready to receive the Torah right then and there. Why was that? Not because we were not inspired and not because it was insincere. We sang Shira, the most genuine expression of emotion. But we jumped. We jumped from the 49th level of Tumah, a very low level, to a very, very high level. It wasn't earned. It didn't happen as a gradual process. And that's why we needed Sfiras HaOmer. 49 days, day after day, to build up, to internalize that inspiration. And that is how we're able to change, to rise to that level, to make changes deep down inside, to prepare us to receive the Torah. I think that that's something that's very important for us now as we think about how we want to restart our shul experience, to restart our davening, our relationship with Hashem, how we communicate to Hashem. We want to choose actions, and we want to plot out for ourselves a gradual process. And for everyone will have something different, a different way that they want to express their appreciation for what we have, the reverence for the kedusha of a shul, of our holy spaces, the privilege to be able to communicate with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, whether it is putting aside the distractions, maybe it's to leave the cell phone in the car. I don't even need to bring it in. I can leave it in the car. It wouldn't be so terrible. I would survive. Whether it's something as simple as looking forward to the Chazar Sashat, the repetition, and listening to the repetition. Looking forward to that, the repetition that we've been missing for so long. Following the Kriyas HaTorah, the reading of the Torah, following word for word. Choosing an action, putting it into action, and doing it as a step-by-step process to internalize our renewed appreciation of what we now are getting back, what we have had before, and to grow through this experience. Story is told of it was the year 1991, it's January the 14th, right before the Six-Day War. And the entire Jewish nation was on edge, not knowing what was going to happen next. The fate of the Jewish people was hanging in the balance. And the renowned Dayan Dunner of England approached Rav Shach, the Rosh Yeshiva of Panovich Yeshiva. And he said that all of America, all of Europe are inspired. We want to do teshuvah. What should we do? Rav Shach did not respond. That you should never speak another word of Lashon Hara. You should throw everything away and only study Torah. He didn't say anything at all of that nature. He said, pick one thing, something small, give yourself a reasonable time frame and accept that. That's what you should do. He said, I'll tell you a secret. You know what I did? What I accepted this Yom Kippur was to recite Birchas Hamazon from a bencher, from a text. Not forever. I accepted on myself to do that until Pesach. And only while I'm at home. That was Rav Shach, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Panovich Yeshiva. In the most inspiring time, that is what he chose to do. I think that's something that we should take to heart. We have to seize this opportunity. And we have to decide for ourselves right now, what are we going to do differently? How are we going to plot for ourselves a path for growth and to take this inspiration and translate it into change and to come out of this experience with something to show from it, to be able to tell our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren, when we tell them the experiences of the COVID-19 2020 pandemic, to tell them not only the amazing experiences, but all that we've learned and how we became a better person as a result of it.
Hi everyone, thank you to the Kollel for creating this event, especially Rabbi Stettin for setting it up. Yasher Koach. My thoughts are, I'm coming back to something that I've mentioned for Shari Torah on a couple of occasions, especially as we were coming around Shavuos. A thought from Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. He talks about why it is that Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai, why is it that it took place in that location? We have the benefit of hindsight. Of course, that's where it happened. But if we were to think about it more carefully, we may have expected it to take place in a more intrinsically holy place. We may have imagined maybe Yerushalayim. At the time, we were still planning on getting there in a timely fashion. We might have thought some other holy place within Eretz Yisrael. Why is it that it took place in a largely anonymous region? And to such a degree, the place was not of intrinsic holiness, that nowadays that's the case too. We don't think about where is Har Sinai nowadays. We don't view it as a special place to go visit, make pilgrimage to, or anything like that. So why is it that Matan Torah takes place in such a humble location? And Rav Hirsch says, I believe he's not the only one to say it, but he points out that what it accomplishes by giving the Torah in such a setting, it's a setting in which everything else is stripped away. There are none of the other trappings, appurtenances that we would think about, that make up who we are as a nation in terms of our status, our wealth, or having a land. And the reason why that's the case is because all of those things, they're important, they have their place, but they're secondary to the core of what we're about. What we're about ultimately is Torah, and the only way you're going to communicate that is by giving it in an environment in which that is the only thing that's there. The giving of the Torah specifically at Har Sinai imparts that lesson. I think about how in a similar manner, we've been given circumstances that have stripped down so many of the other elements of Jewish life that we're used to, that we've been forced to think about what is essential, what is not, what's ikar, what's primary, what's tafel, what's secondary. These are the kind of considerations we've had to have as we've been going through this whole process. We talk about, just to start, when we were in complete shutdown mode, when there was no gatherings in shul, there were no minyanim, period. Everyone was davening on their own. We're faced with the question of, okay, strip out all those layers. What is tefillah at its core? We're faced with that question. We have to confront it in these circumstances, and hopefully we've been able to take advantage of that time and realize that tefillah is ultimately about cultivating a personal relationship with God. That is hopefully what we gained from that circumstance. But then, okay, things got a little better. It's time to add another layer. We were able to move on to tefillah b'tzibur. We were able to daven with a minyan, daven as a community, which then begs the next question. So what's that about? I think tefillah b'tzibur is largely about showing HaKadosh Baruch Hu and each other a sense of unified purpose and mission, that we pray for the same things, that we have a unifying set of values and dreams, we care about each other, and expressing that through the form of a minyan is incredibly important. Coming together in the way we've had to, it's really forced us to think of it in those terms. Now we're coming to a new parsha. Now we're coming to, everyone's going to be on slightly different timetables, but by and large, it's coming soon. The next layer of praying in a Beis Knesset, in a shul, in a synagogue. So that's significant too, and it gives us the occasion to ask why that's important. What is that about? Why is it something we're doing? Some of us might be thinking, I'm certainly one of the people that's thinking this, is that in these summer months, going to shul means no more oppressive heat. It means no more difficulties competing with the sound of chainsaws and construction work while you're trying to hear Chazaras Hashatz. It means no more bugs flying into my face, hopefully. All of those things are legitimate, by the way, and that will hopefully have better kavanah without all of those disturbances. But that's not really what it's all about. And indeed, there's plenty of Jews that don't grasp that it's more than all of those things. They would be just as happy with indoor house minyanim. But we have to ask, what more is there then? What is the more that having a shul is all about? So the symbolism of a shul, I think, if it's channeled properly and it's put into its proper context, it can be very powerful. What should a shul symbolize? I think two things. First of all, it quite simply symbolizes and expresses our love for God. That's why we build and have shuls. We have a beautiful building, a house of God. It's an expression of that love. Does God need that? like the offerings in the Beis HaMikdash? Of course not, but without a doubt, he appreciates the sentiment of Jews that are united in prayer towards him, and that's the case all the more so when those activities are enhanced, they're given the honor that they deserve with a beautiful synagogue, which we all have, Baruch Hashem. Another reason to have shuls is for ourselves. While our respect and honor of God begins from a personal and internal place, that's how a synagogue gets created. A synagogue is also a reminder to us that we need every so often of our own values and what it is that's important in life. A beautiful structure is meant to tell us not just God, but it's to tell us too, ourselves, that during times when we need a spiritual lift, what goes on in these spaces is important. If you wake up early, stay up late for minyanim, you especially know that sometimes we need that reminder. At times of personal crisis, a shul building is a reminder of who to turn to for help and a listening ear. At times of our greatest joy, a shul is a reminder of who deserves our gratitude and thanks. A shul reminds us of what we need to be reminded of, that we built it in the first place. If you put it all together, I think I would say that we are talking now about the opportunity we have to come back to shuls. I believe that shortchanges what we went through. We also had the opportunity and privilege of praying alone. We've had the opportunity and privilege of praying as a tzibur without shuls. That too is an opportunity. It was an opportunity in that it made us realize what the core of all these things are. I could explain this. I think there's a great mashal that Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch also gives. He wrote a letter once to his cousin named Simon May. He wrote the following. He says, if the day comes that you choose a life's companion for yourself, and you find that you love your new wife only when she's attired in her best jewelry and finest clothing, but she loses her appeal to you when she goes about her housework in an everyday housecoat, then woe to that love that you hold for her. Nonetheless, when someone truly loves his wife, he wants to give her beautiful jewelry, and the stronger his love, the finer the jewels he gives, but for her sake and not his, only for her sake. So it is in this manner, my dear cousin. Someone who doesn't love Judaism, even when she's dressed in her old dusty clothes, so to speak, will not love her in her finery either. Therefore, not for those who are weak in their devotion, but for you who are strong, or rather for Judaism itself, do those who truly love her desire to see her adorned with the greatest honor. Over the past few months, we've been given the opportunity to show HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we love him in lahavdil, older, dustier clothing. Davening on our own, davening in outdoor minyanim, things that are not as fancy, not as elaborate, not the way that we would like to, but we've been showing that love nonetheless. Let's not forget that we express the love in those instances and use it to fuel a new lease on shul life and infuse it with meaning and beautiful tefillah. And I'd be remiss to leave it at that, not to say anything practical. Rabbi Alter, Rabbi Minzer have mentioned similar things, but it's the kind of thing that I think is probably valuable for us to repeat anyways. My own thoughts on things that you may want to consider implementing. It's already been the case with outdoor minyanim, but now even more so, it's going to be a time to reinforce what we all know to be good habits. At first, you won't even have the chance to, say, reasonably talk to anyone next to you. They'll be too far away. I hope you're not going to be loud enough to talk to someone 6 feet away. You're going to be doing this the right way at first, regardless of our current attitude to talking in shul. But use this as a time of akrei pu'ulos nimshachos alavavos, that, when you walk the walk, you eventually feel it as well. Be conscious about the distance from talking that's being created, such that when the time comes that you can get within earshot of somebody, you'll have molded your attitude to tefillah such that talking still won't occur to you. Second thing is that as we start, many of us won't really have the chance to pick our spot in shul, I think, such that we'll have our makom kavua of old, our davening space. Later, as things get even better, Yirtzeh Hashem, you'll have an opportunity perhaps to even pick a new one, a new makom. Personally, I think it's a time to maybe reconsider your makom kavua. According to most commentaries with respect to this topic, makom kavua is a concept rooted in having kavana, having concentration and focus. You're used to the space. It has a more dedicated purpose. It's a space you've crafted into a zone of focus. I would say this before all the COVID stuff, but if your previous makom is one that happens to be near your closest friends, you always have something urgent to talk about with, might be a time to get a different makom. A story for myself, I know that when I was dating my eventual wife, so I was passing through her neighborhood, And I kept the distance from my father-in-law at the minyan at that shul. I wanted to keep a low profile. I didn't want anybody to know why I was there. People ask, hey, how you doing? I said, I'm just passing through. And that was where it was left for the most part until eventually we got engaged. And, people ribbed me at the engagement party saying, oh, you're just passing through, eh? But eventually the time came where everybody knew the secret was out, so to speak, and okay, I'm back at this shul, I'm davening again. And I stayed in my distant place from my father-in-law. Insert your in-law joke here, but people ask me, the jig is up, you could sit next to him now. And I said, I like him, he's a nice guy, we're friendly with each other, but during tefillah, what's the point anyways? It's not a time to be talking to anyone, so why sit next to somebody that you're going to have that kind of more talkative relationship with? It's not something that's kedai to do in a tefillah setting. Think about who you're going to sit near, who you're not going to sit near. Not because there's anything wrong with them, not because there's anything wrong with you, but just how a good habit like this can die. Sit with people and as isolated of a spot as you can to really have a beautiful makom kavod that you can have your focus. And lastly, it's a time to rethink having and using our devices in shul. This is going to be the hardest of all of these things because there's nothing that I can think of about COVID that's imposing anything on you in this regard. Your makom is being imposed on you. Your distance is being imposed on you. Nothing about devices. I would highly recommend, though, that our phones be off for tefillah. I say this as somebody who uses my phone regularly during tefillah to look up zmanim, to pinpoint when we can put on talis and tefillin, to text people to make sure they're coming to make a minyan, using a phone for important tefillah purposes. And I think this is still important enough that I need to think of other ways to do those things without having my phone too handy. And by phone off, I don't mean ringer on vibrate or ringer off or airplane mode even. I think off is really the best idea here. What's the difference between off and all of those things? It's that even if we manage to go through a whole tefillah without taking our phones out of our pockets, without them ringing or vibrating, disturbing our kavanah, an off phone, or even better, maybe if it's left somewhere else, not even being brought in with you, it makes for a substantially better tefillah experience. And for myself, one of the things that makes Shabbos a completely different experience is that nothing is in my pocket. The phone is, so to speak, completely off the table. My mind doesn't consider what I could be doing with my phone. Whereas when it's in my pocket, that's certainly in the back of my mind. When it's off the table, it negates a certain pizor hanefesh. It creates a headspace such that tefillah is a different experience. It allows chazar hashatz, the repetition of the Amidah, to be something experienced. We wouldn't take out a novel or a newspaper in the middle of tefillah to read it, or at least I should say most people would never do such a thing. So why should using a phone in the exact same way be any different? There's no reason for that, and that's why it's something to strongly consider to put it away, along with everything else we've mentioned, to show that we don't take the privilege of tefillah b'tzibor, and now tefillah b'tzibor in a shul lightly. Hopefully we take all of these things with us in one way or another, and the experience as a whole makes us realize what each and everything that we have, all of these different components, what their purpose is, and how we can really do things the right way going forward.
Good evening. Thank you again to the Kollel, Rabbi Stettin. Special thank you also to Rabbi Alt, Rabbi Goldschmidt, Rabbi Mister, Rabbi Spetner, my colleagues, that we went through this pandemic together, and I was lucky to hear from you tonight. Some ways to take it with us. A few weeks ago, I heard from a parents who married off their child during this pandemic. It was a daughter, not someone from Cincinnati. And weeks leading up to the wedding, what she envisioned from a huge wedding slowly was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking to a smaller and smaller wedding. And eventually, it turned into a small, simple backyard wedding with no one present besides her siblings. That was it. And the mother tells me, as she came to the wedding, she didn't know what to expect. Her daughter had been not in the greatest of moods leading up to the wedding. It wasn't easy as of time preparing for it. And she didn't know what was going to happen. And they had the chuppah, so it was beautiful, special, and small. And then it came to the dancing. And the dancing was only the immediate siblings, the Kollel's immediate siblings, and no one else. They were dancing together. And she said she has a number of children. And she made a few other weddings before this. And her previous weddings, she has two children particularly who really weren't part of the festivities, the dancing. One was a child, a very quiet child, who really slunk off to the side. It wasn't really much part of the celebration, shy, reserved, and stuck to the side. Another was as a teenager who was struggling with Yiddishkeit, struggling with life. And also by the previous two weddings they had made, wasn't part of the celebration, didn't feel connected to the family in the celebration. And she said she watched the dancing, and she was saying it over with tears in her eyes, how all of her children together, including those two children, were together dancing, celebrating together with their sister. And she said the tears are running down her eyes as she watched her children, every one of them come together with something she had never envisioned possibly before. And then she said that the next day, her daughter called her. And the daughter told her the following line, that she wouldn't have replaced all of her friends being there if it would have meant all her siblings, but particularly those two not being part of the wedding celebration. And she said they were more, the joy, the festivity was so complete for her because all of her siblings were there rejoicing and together part of the celebration. 3,332 years ago, we also celebrated a wedding. The chuppah was a mountain. The candles were lightning. The music was thunder. It was decorated with a breathtaking arrangement of flowers that was spread throughout the chuppah and throughout the mountain. And every one of us entered into a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu under that chuppah as part of that wedding. The zenith of that relationship wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't just at Har Sinai for that moment of the wedding, the moment of the relationship, and ended. But it continued. The Ramban writes in the Hakdama in his beginning, in his introduction to Parashat Truma, the Sayyid HaMishkan, the foundation of what the Mishkan, what the tabernacle, and subsequently the Beis HaMikdash was all about, that same grandeur of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the relationship that we made and connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Har Sinai should continue. It wasn't meant to be a one-time event. It wasn't meant to be just there at Har Sinai, but it continued into the Mishkan and into the Beis HaMikdash. And the Ramban says similarly in his introduction to Bamidbar that the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash had boundaries, similar to Har Sinai. On Har Sinai, there was boundaries. No one's allowed to go up on the mountain besides Moshe Rabbeinu. And so too the Beis HaMikdash and the Mishkan. There are boundaries. A non-Kohen can only enter certain parts. Even a Kohen can't go into the Kodesh Kadashim. Someone who's Tameh can't enter the Beis HaMikdash. There's gvulim, there's boundaries of who can go, similar to Har Sinai. And that was the continuation of the Har Sinai experience, going into the Mishkan, going into the Beis HaMikdash. But then that too was also destroyed. And we lost the Mishkan, and we lost the Beis HaMikdash. And says the Gemara in Megillah, the experience still didn't end. As the Gemara says from a pasuk in Yecheskel, Yisham Mikdash Ma'at, that experience will now go and transfer into the Bate Knesiyos and Bate Midrashos, every one of our shuls, every one of our Bate Midrashos, that same experience that we had in Har Sinai, that we had in the Mishkan, that we had in the Beis HaMikdash, is now going to transfer into the Bate Knesiyos, the shuls and Bate Midrashos, Shebebavel, and really throughout the entire world. It's an incredible medrash that is quoted by the Sheikh Musar, that he says at the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, there were stones where Nespazer spread out. All of those stones that were part of the Beis HaMikdash spread out throughout the entire world. And wherever one of those stones landed, that's where the shuls and Beit Midrashos were built. the foundation built from the Beis Hamikdash. So we had a progression. Har Sinai experience led into a Mishkan, led into a Beis Hamikdash, and led into Arba Taknesiyas and Bati Midrashas. And that experience also was similar. Because in the beginning, it was just Moshe Rabbeinu with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, it was the Kohanim, those who were Tahar. In the Bati Taknesiyas and Bati Midrashas, it's all of us. We're all in. We're all part of it. We're all part of the experience. And perhaps the reason is that as there was a greater need for us to be able to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the lowering in generations, as we move further from the Har Sinai experience, we have to let more people in. More of us have to be able to be part of that experience. And therefore, in the Bati Knesiyos and Bati Midrashos, we're all part of that. We're all in. We all have that privilege. But as part of that privilege, of all of us being part of it, there's a challenge. As the Pasuk says in this week's Parsha, the song that we're all waiting to sing again, Vahi ben Tzaya Aaron, whether we sing it or say it or part of it, everywhere we do it. Kuma Hashem v'yafutza ovecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. And talks about the ovecha, the enemies, the misanecha, those who hate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who are those people? Who are we talking about? Who hates and who are these people that we're trying to run and trying to escape from? Says the Marsha in Shabbos, that it's referring to those who don't have the ability to appreciate a Beis Hamikdash and a Beis Hamedrash and a Beis Knesses. They're the Oyevecha, the Misanecha, the ones who we're trying to run from and stay away from. Because when everyone's there, when everyone's allowed in, there's also the enemies, those who don't appreciate what it means, the Beis Knesses and the Beis Hamedrash. We're up to the last stage. The last stage, after going through the Har Sinai, the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishkan, the Gemara says all of our shuls are going to go back, and they're going to become part of the ultimate Mikdash, the ultimate Beis Hamikdash. And the Mashal says on that Gemara that means the actual physical buildings, every one of our shuls are going to become part of the physical structure of the Beis Hamikdash. It's going to rejoin and reconnect. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu was maybe asking us, if we're up to that last stage, we're up to the stage of bringing back about the Knesiyos and Bati Midrashos to join the physical structure of the Beis Hamikdash. We need maybe a cleaning out of the enemies. As was mentioned, the restart. To be able to have a pristine experience that could return now to the Beis Hamikdash and ultimately to the Har Sinai experience. How are we going to do that? How are we going to be able to go and rejoin every one of our shuls, every one of us to the ultimate Beis Hamikdash? Kosh Baruch Hu says we need two things. We need, number one, to get rid of the enemies. Get rid of them. And also appreciate the relationship. That relationship that every one of us have the ability to have, that wedding that we want to experience, the wedding that all of us are going to be part of it. The enemies aren't there, it's just us who appreciate, that's who we're trying to reconnect to. And I think we need two things to do that. We need a sur meira and an aseh tov. We need to leave the enemies that every one of us have inside of us that are trying to take away from the kedusha of the Beis Knesses, and then aseh tov, appreciation of what that experience looks like, appreciation of the relationship that we're forming and forging to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Beis Hamikdash, through the Beis Knesses and Beis Hamedrash experience. A number of ideas were mentioned by the other Chashuv Rabbanim of getting rid of the enemies. We all know what those enemies are. I don't have to tell you who your enemy is. You know who your enemy is. You know who you have to get rid of. You know the enemy inside of you that you need to remove and get rid of and not allow to become part of this new experience of the shul of Bati Knesiyos. Let's figure out what that enemy is. Let's remove that enemy so we can have the pristine experience of the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then also aseh tov. We need a positive aspect, a positive appreciation of our Beis Hamikdash, of our Beis Hamedrash, of our Beis Knesses, and of the tefillah experience. I personally decided I'm going to start something which I had never done before, at least on a consistent basis. I'm going to learn sha'arim b'tefillah. to learn a few minutes a day from the Sefer of Pinchas about the appreciation of tefillah. And there are hundreds of svarim out there that talk about appreciation of tefillah, about the translation of the words, about the meaning of the words. Find your Sefer. Find something which will talk to you and explain and give you the ability to appreciate tefillah on a better level. Appreciate the shul on a better level. Appreciate the cover of the Beis Knesset and Beis Medrash on a higher level. Asur meirah, get rid of the enemies, and asay tov. And without thinking today, before we go back into the shuls, what's going to be every one of us, sur meirah, and what's going to be our asay tov, we're not going to have the ability to be able to enter in a pristine way to re-experience the Har Sinai experience that we're all looking for. We'll give all of us a bracha. We should have the ability to find what those enemies are, to examine for ourselves and to think for ourselves, how do I get rid of those enemies? What is my enemy? And what can I take away from my pristine experience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And what's my asay tov? What's my appreciation that I can have of tefillah, of Beis HaKnesses, of the Beis Medrash experience to make it a more pristine place, and it'd be just me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no one else, dancing together, re-experiencing the Har Sinai experience.
So our tefillah, our prayer, that as we return to the place of Hashem Shechina inside our Bata Knesiyos and Bata Midrashos, that we should see soon in our time Hashem return to His Makom HaShechina in Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Have a good night.